It's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. On Tuesday, the Ministry of Interior and Safety launched a new police bureau to oversee police policy as well as promotions and appointments of senior level officers. The nation's police officers strongly condemned the move, as the National Police Agency has been largely independent under previous administrations.
However, the government claimed that the police's growing investigative authority required an official arm of the government to act as a watchdog. So why do we have such transition right now in the country's law enforcement policy? For the answers, we have Professor Song Se-ryun of Kyung-hee University Law School to discuss further. Good morning.
Good morning.
First, let's focus on the government's claim. Lawmakers recently passed a series of amendments that would yield the most of the prosecution's investigative authority to the police. What are these specific changes?
Well, the prosecutor reform was a campaign agenda and a key measure throughout the ex-president, President Moon's tenure. Before, prosecutors had literally all the powers to open, close, direct investigation, and indict the case for prosecution. As far as the criminal justice goes, there was a top-down system. Now, what has changed is that the series of legislation divided the roles between the police and the prosecution. So at first, in 2020, the legislature passed the reform bill that left only 6 crimes for the prosecutor's office to investigate, which was corruption, crimes involving economic activities, public officials, election fraud, crimes involving defense industry, and serious accidents. But then, at the end of President Moon's term, the legislature, mostly DPK, Democratic Party of Korea, passed a legislation that strips almost all powers of investigation from the prosecutor's office. So at this point, because of the political drama, which is that the President Yoon became the president, and of course he was the prosecutor general under the President Moon, and who generally opposed the many aspects of the reform. So the battle line is a little bit drawn between the police and the prosecutor's office. At least the optics of it just looks like that. So despite the general consensus that there is a need to apportion the responsibilities and accountabilities between the police and the prosecution, at this point the key issue seems to be that there is a turf fight between the police and the prosecutor's office for upper hand in a criminal justice system. Now, I think the key issue has to be how to design this change, design this new balance of powers and check and balance system. But I think there's a general failure in the political sector to do that.
And well, the legislative branch, during the passing of this series of laws, it was chaotic to say the least. And well, how was this consensus eventually reached?
Right. The problem is that there was ultimately no consensus between the parties and also within the parties to add. And I think that the key issue that I was talking about, the political process to give the general public the confidence and also kind of accountability and legitimacy to the justice system is very important. But it seems like the reform measure was hastily passed at the end of President Moon's term, but this police bureau institution seems to be a little bit hurried and without too much discussion in the relevant parties. So in that sense, it is doubly risky because the system has to be well designed, but it seems like the details has not been tended to.
Right. So from both sides, we're seeing speedy process without much discussion. Now, what the government is saying seems to be plausible in the front, that the police gain more power, so maybe some control is needed. But the police officers are saying that it will compromise the political neutrality of the police. Now, could you, to many viewers abroad, may not know the sensitivity behind this. So could you give a little bit of a background why police's political neutrality is very important in South Korea?
Well, political neutrality is important historically to begin with. Korea had gone through a handful of dictatorial regimes, and it was an important issue not to let the police power fall into a political strongman's hand. So in that sense, neutrality meant a democratization of Korea, and key feature of that. But with the democratization of Korea almost complete, I think the particular concern is not a pressing issue, but the issue still remains that there has to be a safety guard so that there wouldn't be any reverting back to the unfortunate past. But I think more of important issue at this point is that for the police force, there is a increased role and power, especially more accountability or the role to investigate. So there has to be, accordingly, a more oversight and also check and balance system. So it has to go together. Now, they have to keep their neutrality in terms of the political influence, but at the same time, increased role requires increased oversight, and that oversight has to be transparent. And again, also important is not to involve any political influence.
The Yoon administration, they scrapped the Office of Civil Affairs, which is the department that previously dealt with police affairs. So wouldn't this new police bureau just be the same thing, just rebranding?
Well, in one sense, yes. Back then, the secretary was supposed to just have a liaison role, which would not pose much concern. But frequently, we saw that secretary became the messenger to express president's wishes. So the transparency sometimes was lacking, and there were suspicions that the president was influencing the police governance and how to conduct certain investigations. So that concern remained. Now, if the reform measure is desirable, and to the extent that there is a role division between the police and the prosecutor's office, that effective system has to be well designed. So it's not just a concern about whether the secretary's role is there or is somewhere else in a different form. I think there has to be more visible and also transparent system of check and balances and oversight system. But again, I'm going back to the legislative failure and dysfunctionality of the political system as a whole, that detail has not been tended to. I think that the DPK hastily passed some legislations, and the President Yoon and the executive office's measure these days also lacked some due process requirements. So in that sense, I think everybody has to sit down that this designing of a new governance criminal justice system is very important and requires a lot of efforts and a lot of details to be tended to. And that has to be the focal point rather than being seen as a turf fight.
Right. I mean, we can talk for hours with you, Professor, on this, but thank you so much for your insights. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure. Thank you.